The 2010 NASCAR Sprint Cup Series season was remembered for many things. Jamie McMurray's reuniting with Ganassi and trophy hunting. The thrilling finish between Harvick and McMurray, the most competitive race in NASCAR history. RCR's return to championship form. Marcos Ambrose throwing away the Sonoma race. Carl Edwards almost killing Brad Keselowski. Hendrick Motorsports inter-team rivalry. But this season was different. This season would have a completely different picture without the chase. So with that being said, let's dive in. The opening 6 races only saw 4 different winners. Jamie McMurray would win the Daytona 500 in his reunion with Chip Ganassi. Jimmy Johnson would win 3 of the first 6 races by winning at Auto Club, Las Vegas, and Martinsville. Kurt Busch would win at Atlanta, with Denny Hamlin winning the next week at Bristol. The entire top 10 was within 1 race of each other, with Jimmy Johnson leading the points by 14 points over Biffle and 16 over Matt Kenseth. Johnson in the other 3 races would have finishes of 35th, 12th, and 9th. The defending series champion would seem to pick up right where he left off last season, but the question was, could it last? The answer would be no. Johnson would have finishes of 31st at Talladega and 36th at Darlington, and this would drop him almost completely out of contention because now he was 4th, 131 points back from new leader Kevin Harvick. Kevin Harvick had a terrible 2009 season, finishing 19th in the standings, and was now looking for redemption. In these 6 races, he would have finishes of 13th, 7th, 1st, 3rd, 6th, and 7th. And this would thrust him into the lead over new second place Kyle Busch by 69 points. Matt Kenseth would be placed in 3rd, 126 points behind Harvick, and Denny Hamlin would be the last driver in contention, being 150 points back from Harvick. In the next 6 races, Kevin Harvick would establish himself as the dominant force of the season by finishing 11th, 4th, 19th, 3rd, 5th, and 1st at Daytona. This would put him 212 points ahead of new second place runner Jeff Gordon. Gordon in this part of the season had finishes of 6th, 32nd, 4th, 5th, 4th, and 3rd. Jimmy Johnson, despite winning back-to-back races at Sonoma and Loudon, would lose points to Kevin Harvick due to 2 finishes outside the top 30, and he was now 225 points back. Kyle Busch's season would take a turn for the worse. He would have 4 straight finishes outside the top 10 and would fall out of contention. Matt Kenseth and Denny Hamlin would both fall out of contention due to their own inconsistencies. Kenseth would have 5 straight finishes outside the top 10, and Denny Hamlin would win 2 races but wouldn't have a top 10 in the other 4. So now, it would seem at the halfway point, it would be Kevin Harvick's championship to lose. At Chicagoland, Jeff Gordon would have a very solid day, finishing 3rd, while Harvick would go on to finish 34th, and this would shrink the gap to 103 points. At the Brickyard, Harvick would have a very solid day, finishing 2nd, while Gordon would have a rough day, finishing 23rd, and would grow the gap to 184 points. At Pocono, both drivers would have a very solid day, with Harvick finishing 4th and Gordon 6th, and would slightly grow the gap to 189 points. At Watkins Glen, Gordon would barely beat Harvick with a 10th place, while Harvick would finish 11th to decrease the gap to 185 points. At Michigan, Harvick would win the race while Gordon would finish 27th and would grow the gap to 293 points. At Bristol, Gordon would beat Harvick with an 11th place, while Harvick would finish 14th, shrinking the gap to 279 points. Now the gap is the biggest it has been all season, and all Harvick would have to do was just stay on form and he would be the 2010 champion. At Atlanta, Kevin Harvick would have problems, finishing 33rd, while Jeff Gordon would have a decent day, finishing 13th, and shrink the gap to 219 points. The next race at Richmond, Harvick would stretch the gap by finishing 9th, and Gordon would finish 12th, stretching the gap to 228 points. At Loudon, Harvick would once again increase the gap with a 5th place finish, but Gordon would be too far behind in 6th. The gap was now 230 points. At Dover, Gordon would beat Harvick with an 11th place, while Harvick was in 15th, decreasing the gap to 218 points. But Gordon was now in 3rd. Kyle Busch had moved himself up to second and was now 208 points behind Harvick. At Kansas, Harvick would beat both with a third place finish, while Gordon would be back in 5th and Busch would finish 21st. Gordon would now be 228 points back and Busch 278 points behind. At Auto Club, Harvick would come home 7th while Gordon would finish 9th, growing the gap to 231 points. Kevin Harvick would be in prime position to win his first Cup title. If he didn't have any catastrophic races, he would be the 2010 Sprint Cup Series champion. At Charlotte, Harvick would have a solid day finishing 8th, but there would be a new second place driver. That would be Jimmie Johnson, who is now 249 points back. At Martinsville, Harvick would come home 3rd while Johnson would finish 5th, putting him back by 264 points. At Talladega, Harvick would finish 2nd while Johnson would finish 7th and would grow the gap to 288 points. At Texas, Jimmie Johnson would have a rough night with his pit crew, which caused Chad Knaus to switch his pit crew with Jeff Gordon's, and even after that, he only ever got to a 9th place finish, while Harvick would finish 6th, growing the gap to 300 points. Going into the penultimate race of the season, Harvick could lock up the championship one race early with a 35th place finish. With Johnson finishing 5th, that wouldn't even be good enough to get in contention. Harvick would finish one place behind Johnson in 6th, and with that, Harvick would now be the 2010 champion a week early, making the last race at Homestead pointless. At Homestead, Johnson would finish the season strong with a 2nd place finish, while Harvick would finish 3rd and win the title by 285 points over Jimmie Johnson. This was truly a dominant season. So after that, this proved that Harvick would absolutely obliterate the field with his consistency and would dominate the 2010 season. He would grab the points lead at the 10th race of the season at Richmond and run away with it. Jimmie Johnson would have fallen out of contention halfway through the season, and Denny Hamlin wouldn't even be part of the conversation, but would still have a very solid season finishing 3rd. Johnson would lose what would be his 5th straight championship in real life, but would give Kevin Harvick his 1st. And in real life, this would also be the end of Jimmie Johnson's 5 consecutive championships. Well, that will do it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week for 2011.